Welcome to this session to do with ACCA P3. This is, get rid of me for a second, this is going to be session 2. In my numbering, we're going to have part 1, then we're going to have part 2. And in this particular session, we are going to be looking at things which affect our strategic choices. If you remember back in session 1, we looked at a definition of strategy, and our definition of strategy was the direction and scope of the organisation. What do they do next? We looked at the 3 stages of setting strategy, and we said strategic choice was stage 2, but stage 1 was strategic analysis. So today, in this particular session, we're going to begin looking at what makes a difference. So we're going to look at stakeholders, culture, the macro environment, and you can see there down at the bottom we will be looking at the ham and shoes question that we looked at last time. That's question 36 in the revision kit. So let's have chapter 2. Here we go. So chapter 2 is going to be talking about stakeholders, it's going to be talking about ethics, it's going to be talking about culture. Now, please remember, with stakeholders, with ethics, with culture, I've already said this a couple of minutes ago, but the key thing is, how does it affect the strategy of the organisation? That's the key thing that we've got here. Now, you may remember in the previous session, we started looking at chapter 1, and we said at the beginning of each chapter, there are going to be exam requirements. This chapter is no different. So, June 2012, this is the question that we were looking at last time, and we'll look at it again this time. Advise the Hammond family on the importance of mission statements, etc., etc. Now, again, notice what it does not say. It does not say define a mission statement. It does not say give examples of good mission statements, give examples of poor mission statements. It does not say why would a company use a mission statement. It doesn't say any of those things. It says why is it important for this company. Now, a lot of students in June 2012, because this is one of the exams I marked, a lot of students in June 2012 gave me very good essays about mission statements that didn't mention the Hammond family or Hammond shoes. They weren't mentioned at all. So obviously out of 12 marks they were only getting 2 because they hadn't answered the question. So remember I said last time, the exam is about applying your knowledge. So why is this important in this organisation? That's what that question is about. December 2011. Analyse the culture. So we will be looking at a model called the cultural web. We'll be looking at that later on in this, in the next session. And the cultural web says, here's all the things that affect the culture. So you have to learn the headings, you have to learn the definitions, but then you have to say, and this is what's going on in this company. So again, if you've not heard of the cultural web, don't worry. One of the things that you have in the cultural web is you have status symbols. Status symbols, there's your heading, definition, status symbols mean this, and here is what it means in this organisation. Power structures, here's a definition, and here is what it means in this organisation. That's what you need to do in P3, you need to apply your knowledge. Notice what else it says. What's the implications for them in the future? It will probably turn out that they're not doing very well, and they need to fix that if they want to be successful in the future. So analyse, this is what's happening, this is what difference it's going to make for the direction and scope of the organisation. It will turn out they need to do something different. December 2009, identify the stakeholders. And then, how could you manage them? So what happens in December 2009 is you get a company and they make an acquisition. And part C of the question is about, right, now you've made this acquisition, how can you make sure your key stakeholders are okay with now the fact that there is a new person running this organisation? There's now a new owner that's taking over. How do you make sure that that's a success? Now, again, what a lot of students did was they identified the stakeholders, and that was it. They just said, here's the stakeholders, they are key players, they are minimal efforts, whatever it was, and then they went on and answered a different question. They never actually answered that question at all. So, applying your knowledge. If you have no idea about stakeholders, don't worry, we're going to cover it in a minute. So again, you notice the kind of questions we've got there: advise, analyse, identify, assess, etc., etc. It's all very practical. So, the first thing that we're going to do in Chapter 2, this is going to be on page... I don't know what page it's going to be on, I'm afraid. I haven't got a page number on there. First thing we're going to do in Chapter 2 is we're going to look at Mendeley. I was going to tell you the page number, and I don't know what the page number is. So we're going to look at Mendeley. Now, Mendeley is a model that most people have seen before. These definitions, or these categories, are probably familiar to most of you, because I think they're in F5. If they're not in F5, I'm certain you've seen them somewhere else. So this is knowledge that you're expected to have. If you haven't got it or you forgot, don't worry, because I'm going to go through it. But remember, with P3, it's about applying it. So Mendeley says, right, we have a problem. The problem is that when we did our definition of strategy in Chapter 1, strategy, the direction scope of the organisation over the long term, blah, 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 to fulfil stakeholder expectations. And we have a problem with those last three words. What the company, what the organisation needs to do is to fulfil stakeholder expectations. It needs to keep stakeholders happy. Now, I assume that all of you are okay with the idea that a stakeholder, not a shareholder, a stakeholder is simply somebody who's affected by business. It actually says that at the top of that page. So stakeholders is anybody who's interested in an organisation, who's affected by what they do. Now that means that you guys are stakeholders in LSBF because you're customers. I'm a stakeholder in LSBF because I'm an employee. I'm also a stakeholder in LSBF from a different point of view because I'm also a shareholder. Now the thing is that LSBF has to fulfil your expectations and it has to fulfil my expectations. Is it able to do that? Now what is it that you want from LSBF? Well, you probably want something like lots of material to study from and very low prices. From your point of view, that's what you expect. Fair enough. What do I expect? As an employee, what do I expect? I expect a high salary. I expect to have classrooms that don't have too many students in them, because if you have too many, it becomes very difficult. And I expect to not have to work too many days. Yeah, we have a certain number of days we have to work, and the more you work, obviously the tighter you get, and it's difficult teaching 100 people if you've already worked 7 or 8 days in a row. So the idea is that you want low prices, good quality materials. I want high salaries, and I want, to not have to do too many hours. And what do the shareholders want? They want profits. Now the trouble is, those three do not go together. You can't have high profits if you're paying me a good wage and you're not paying much for the course. One way we could get around that is to have very, very large classrooms with hundreds of students in it. That would satisfy you because it would keep the prices down. It would satisfy the shareholders because it would keep profits up, but it wouldn't satisfy me as a lecturer because I don't want to teach big classes. It's hard work. So the trouble is you can't keep everybody happy. So we have a problem with our definition. Our definition was fulfill stakeholder expectations, and you can't. You cannot keep everybody happy. So Mendeley says, right, let's work out who we must keep happy. Let's work out who we must keep happy, and let's work out who we're not as bothered about. Now, this is the key thing that Mendeley does, and this is the key thing that you've got to do in the exam. There will be some stakeholders in the exam that you say, this is what they want, and you know what? They're not going to get it. Other stakeholders, this is what they want, you must do that. And the big thing, we're going to see this in Chapter 7, is that there are some strategies that the examiner will come up with. The examiner will say, what do you think about this idea? And you will say, no, because it's going to upset these stakeholders that we really care about. Or you might say, yes, I do think that's a good idea. It's going to upset these stakeholders, but we don't care about them anyway. So you need to know who these are, because it's going to affect what you choose to do with your direction and scope of your organisation. Now, what Mendeley says then, the way that we get the 4 boxes, is we look at interest and we look at power. Now, I'll be honest with you, there is no correct way to draw this diagram. Often I flip it round the other way and have power up the side and interest on top. Does make a difference. What's important is what we do with the diagram. So we have interest and power. Interest, high interest, you are affected a lot by whatever decisions are being made. Low interest, you're not affected a lot. So one of the things to remember in the exam is that stakeholders will move where they are on Mendeley's grid, depending on what you're deciding. If you remember, I'll just go back up to the top of this page. Stakeholder is somebody who's interested, who's affected by the decisions. There are some decisions that affect me a lot. I would be high interest for those decisions. There are other decisions that don't affect me at all. I would be low interest for those decisions. So, for example, one of the decisions that was being made is we've moved buildings. We've moved the building that we do the filming in. That affects me a lot. I am high interest. Other things, such as they've moved where the MBA courses are running, I don't teach MBA, I don't care. I'm low interest for that. So just be careful who is affected by the decision we're looking at in the exam question. A lot of students simply say shareholders are always interested, employees are always high interest, customers are always this, suppliers are always that. No, they're not. It depends on the one decision you're looking at in the exam. So interest, how affected are you? Power, can you do anything about it? If you don't like it, can you stop it? High power, you don't like it, you can stop it from happening. High power, you do like it, if you support it, it's got a very good chance of working. So high power, don't like it, stop it. Do like it, support it. Low power, I don't like it, tough. Low power, I do like it, won't make any difference. So Mendeley says, let's divide up all of the different stakeholders into these 4 different boxes. So first of all, we have people who are known as key players. Now, the name isn't really important in P3. In other papers like F5, it's simply knowing they're called the key players is what gets you the mark. P3, it isn't. Key players are the people you must keep happy. So what will keep them happy? That's the key thing in P3. The examiner will say, here is a strategy. What do you think? And you will have to say to yourself, will it keep these people happy or not? And you might have to explain why it will keep them happy or why they will be upset by it. If they're upset by it because they're high power, they're going to say no, the strategy won't work. So you would have to say to the examiner, this idea won't work because this group of stakeholders are going to say no. They will say no because, and they are high power because, so they're going to stop it from happening. So you need to justify why it makes any difference. So key players. Now the other important group, bottom right-hand corner, I do apologise, what are called the keep satisfied group. Now again, The name doesn't really matter in P3. What matters is these people must also be kept happy. Now, I don't call them keep satisfied. I call them the don't upset group. The examiner says, here is my strategy. What do you think? And you say, it's going to upset these people because they're high power, because, so they're going to stop it. That strategy won't work. Or they're high power because, and they won't mind. This won't upset them because, so therefore it is okay. So the idea is that you must tell me what the significance of these stakeholders is. They will like it. Why do we care? They won't like it. Why do we care? Why won't they like it? So they won't like it because they're higher power, because, so this is the big deal. They're going to say no, they're going to stop it. Those are the big two groups. So whenever the examiner says, here is a strategy, will these guys say yes or no? Why will they say yes or no? And then, of course, why does it matter? Now, the other two groups aren't nearly as important, to be honest with you. They're not as important from the point of view of the exam. Keep informed. The keep informed group have got low power. So we tell them what we are doing. What happens if they don't like it? To a certain extent, I'm afraid we don't care because they're low power. They can't stop it from happening even if they wanted to. And the final group we have, I will put in for completeness in the exam. I'm going to put a cross through that because in the exam I wouldn't bother with them. You've got a limited amount of time in the exam. Why are you going to waste your time talking about a group that aren't really that bothered because they're low interest, they can't do anything anyway? Yep. So high and low power, high and low interest. In the exam you often will get 3 different stakeholder groups. It will be one from each of those boxes. Now let's have an example from LSBF. Right. Key players. I would argue that the lecturers are up in that top right-hand box. We have a lot of power, and obviously because this is my employer, I have a lot of interest in what they do. I'm affected by a lot of the decisions that LSBF do because I work for them. And we are relatively high power because a lot of students come to LSBF to be taught by particular lecturers. There will be some of you, I do appreciate, who are watching this simply because you've done other courses with LSBF and this is the next course. But there are quite a lot of students who will come to P3 because of me, or go to Martin. We'll go to P2 with LSBF because it's Martin, or Francis at F7. We actually bring in quite a lot of students, so that makes us powerful. So let's imagine that LSBF were going to say, we are going to cut your wages. I almost tremble at the thought of saying that. We're going to cut your wages and we're going to increase the number of days that you teach. That would not be acceptable to us, and we're powerful enough that we could stop that from happening. So a key player group, you need to find out who they are in the exam and you need to say, will they agree with this or not? Keep satisfied. The keep satisfied groups are the ones who most of the time do not even care about LSBF. They don't care what we're doing. Now, an example of this is the police. Quite a few years ago, when I first started working at LSBF, I wasn't teaching this particular day, but I heard about this afterwards. Excuse me. We had a fire practice, which is obviously a very sensible thing to do, except that nobody had told the lecturers where students are supposed to go if there is a fire. So we all now know. So if there's a fire, I now know where I'm supposed to go. But at that point, nobody told the lecturers. But they had a fire practice anyway. So what happened was all the students came out of the building and they stood in front of the building because they didn't know where to go because they hadn't been told because the lecturers didn't know. So they stood in front of the building and more students came out and more students came out until we were blocking the pavement. All right, so nobody could actually get past and walk along the pavement because of our students. And more students came out and more students came out and the pavement was full. So what did the students do? They stood in the road. And they blocked the road up as well. So we had a situation within about 5 minutes where we'd blocked the pavement and we had blocked the road. And we were causing a traffic jam in central London. And about 2 minutes after that, the police turned up. And the police said to the students, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, the fire alarm's gone off, so we're standing here." And they said to you, "You can't stay, you've got to get off the pavement and you've got to clear the pavement so people can walk past." So we did. So we had our students basically standing all over the pavement. And they went and found the people in charge and they said, "What were you doing?" "We were having a fire practice." "Why were your students in the road?" And the police said, "Well, we appreciate, we'd only just moved into the building. We appreciate that it was a new situation. We'll let you off this time. If you do it again, you will pay a fine." And the fine was going to be, we didn't have to pay it, but if we ever cause this problem again, we will. The fine was going to be £10,000. As far as I'm aware, that's the only time the police have ever been involved in anything at LSBF that I am aware of. So most of the time, they have no idea who we are. But when they do get involved, they have got higher power to stop you doing something or to make you do something. So in the exam, with LSBF, let's imagine, for example, then that LSBF decided, for some unknown reason, we're going to have classes out on the pavement. We haven't got enough rooms in this building. We'll set up some desks and some chairs on the pavement. Now, that would be a strategy. That obviously isn't going to work because the police are going to say no. So when you're looking at the strategy in the exam, you must make sure that your strategy keeps the key players happy and does not upset the keep satisfieds. Because if it upsets the keep satisfieds, if it does not keep the key players happy, they will say no and your strategy will not work. It is very, very, very common in the exam for the examiner to choose something that is going to upset one of the high power groups. Now, the thing is, he won't tell you which group it is. He won't say, blah, 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 and it's going to upset this group. He will have given you some information in the scenario that you can work out here is a high power group. And then later on, he will expect you to work out that whatever he's suggesting is going to upset that group. And because the high power, we've got a problem. So key players, keep satisfied. Keep informed. I'm afraid that's where most of our students are. Not all of our students, but most of our students there. Most of our students have got low power. They're obviously very affected by what we do because they're customers, they're coming to the college, but most people have got low power. So, for example, these videos that you are watching are being filmed in 1 hour pieces, 1 hour chunks. Now, that might be too long for you. That might be too short for you. There might be things that I am doing that you'd rather I do it in a different way. I'm afraid you're getting what we're doing. You're getting what we're providing for you. Yeah, you as an individual student, I'm afraid, are low power because you're just one individual. If there were 300 or 400 of you who all got together and said, we want it done like this, then we would have to do it like that. But as an individual student, you're low power. So I'm afraid you're getting what we choose to give you. Now, that's the same a lot of customers. I'm a customer of lots of things. You're customers of lots of other things. And often customers just get what they're given. We have no choice in things. So in the exam, Mendelot is useful to say, will this strategy be popular? If it isn't popular, how much power have the people got who don't like it? If they're high power, they'll stop it. If they're low power, it will happen anyway. So Mendelot is a very, very useful model. But notice again, you have to apply it. I said this in chapter 1. In fact, I said it in the introduction to the paper. I hadn't even got to chapter 1. Paper 3 is all about applying the models. So you can't simply say, we get students in the exam who just draw the diagram and label up the boxes. And that's it, that's all they do. Well, that hasn't answered the question. The question is going to be, use this to tell me something. Is this strategy going to work? Or how do you look after these stakeholders once you've made an acquisition? Or something else, but it will be very practical. So please remember that in the exam. Okay then, stakeholders is something that should be familiar to everybody. Something else that should be familiar to everybody is corporate governance and ethics. I'm not going to spend very long on corporate governance, to be honest with you, because if you've done P1, you've done more than enough corporate governance for what we need in P3. The only thing I would say, because some students say, why is corporate governance in P3? Because corporate governance is about it's all about how decisions are made. I'm not an expert on the corporate governance rules, basically because I don't have to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not an expert on the corporate governance rules, but I do know what they're about is making sure that the people running an organisation are making decisions that are good for the owners of the organisation, not just for themselves. So in other words, when they're making a strategic decision, they're making a strategic decision that's in the best interests of the shareholders, not just of the board of directors. And that's what all the rules are basically there to do with. So that's why it's in the P3 syllabus. So what you could have, corporate governance, what you could have in the exam is you could have a situation where a company's got poor corporate governance and because of that, it has made poor decisions in the past and maybe the company's not doing very well. So corporate governance, that's all I'm going to say about corporate governance, to be honest with you. You've got all the rules there. I'm sure you know them already. Social responsibility. Social responsibility, CSR, is ethics. And ethics, again, and CSR are both in the P1 syllabus. CSR is ethics for a company. Individuals have ethics. Companies have corporate social responsibility. But it's basically the same thing. Now, how is this going to work in the P3 exam? Again, I do not expect there to be anything detailed about ethics or corporate social responsibility in the P3 exam. So how would it be tested? It might well be that the examiner is saying, here is a particular strategic choice. Here is something that we are thinking about doing. And you have to come along and say, no, you can't do that because it's poor CSR. So let's say, for example, that a company is thinking of shutting down a factory in the UK and moving production to somewhere else which is lower cost. Now, you could argue that that is poor corporate social responsibility from the point of view of people in the UK. You're going to lose UK jobs and relocate overseas. Now, the key thing, remember, is some companies care about that and some companies don't. If the company is if the examiner says the company feels it's there simply to make money for the shareholders, then the company will do the relocation. They won't care. On the other hand, if it says something like the company feels it needs to look after its workers and it feels that it should pay a full amount of tax in the UK, if that's what it says, then that choice probably won't be acceptable to the owners of the company. They will probably say, no, we're not going to do that. So CSR in the exam might be used for you to say, no, don't do that particular strategy. Or an alternative would be to give a competitive advantage. Now, you may remember, again, in the definition of strategy, what we said is that companies are trying to gain an advantage. In other words, they're trying to have a reason why customers go to them. You could say, come to us because we do this, we act in this particular way, and none of our rivals do. So you should come to us because we're doing things right and they do things wrong. And there are a number of companies around the world, that's what they basically have as their competitive advantage. So, as I said, I can't see that you're going to be tested in any detail on this section, but it might be You can't do that because it's not corporate social responsibility, or you should do that because it's something that will gain us an advantage over our rivals. That's how I can see the P3 examiner testing this. And that links into mission statements. Now again, mission statements you've probably seen in other papers, and you've got a definition, but that'll do. Core values, mission statements are the principles. Now again, the idea behind this, a bit like when we were talking about CSR just now, is that there may be some choices where the owners say, no, we are not going to do that. For whatever reason, we do not think that that is a good idea. We do not believe in that. We're just not going to do what you are suggesting. Now, let's have a look. Let's have a look at an example of this. Right, here is the June 2012 exam. Now, the reason it's got a highlighter and writing all over it, if you remember, we had a look at this last time. Let's have a look at it again. Let's have a look at this time. We're going to look at part C. So it says, advise the Hammond family on the importance of mission and values and objectives when we're thinking about the strategy at Hammond Hughes. So in other words, are mission statements important, and if so, why are they important for this particular organisation? Right, let's have a look then. Now I'm just going to erase what I've got there just so it doesn't distract us too much. That should be it. So let's have a look and see what it says. The first paragraph is simply some background to the organisation. Hammond Hughes was founded 100 years ago by two brothers. And at the time the company was founded, workers did not have very good working conditions. So, Hammond family, they said, secure jobs, good working conditions, and that's what they still try and follow. So that's what they still try and follow. Okay then. So, what's happened? Well, one of the things that you may remember from last time, is that they had some issues with the fact they had some professional managers. The company's now run by professional managers. Now, the problem is the Hammond family are very big believers in things like secure jobs, good working conditions. That's what the family believe in. But the people making the decisions are now not the same people. Are they making different decisions? Are the choices that the managers are making something that the owners would say no? Well, one of the things you may remember, because we looked at this last time, the company aims to pay all suppliers within 30 days of the invoice date, and the managers who have taken over are not doing this anymore. If you remember, it says that paying suppliers is now 63 days. So in other words, the managers are going against something that the owners think is really important. What's the importance of the mission statement? You need to tell the managers, this is what we want you to do. We want you to pay the suppliers within 28 days. Obviously what the managers are doing what they think is best for the company. They're managing the cash properly. From an F9 point of view, this is absolutely fine. As you guys know, from an F9 point of view, paying your suppliers late is great. It's free finance. But it's not what the owners of the company want. So the significance of this is they should tell the managers, don't do this. It is not what we believe. We believe in treating people fairly. Now, there's some other bits and pieces that we can look at. It says, for example, the managers, remember these are the outside people, have suggested that we close down the production plant and we move production overseas. Now, why would you do that? You would obviously do that to save money. So from a shareholder's point of view, that's exactly the right thing to do. But what happens in this question, this was immediately rejected by the Hammond family. Why? Because it goes against the mission, the values of the owners of the company. The Hammond family say, no, you should look after our workers. We believe in looking after our workers. We believe that you should have the workers in this country and not relocate overseas. So you've got the managers who are doing something which goes against what the owners want. Now there are two examples there. Now that's not going to get us 12 marks, and please don't think that I'm saying it will get 12 marks. It won't. It'll probably only get us. We'll probably get one for definition of strategy, maybe 2 marks for that, and we'll get 2 marks for talking about not paying the suppliers on time, and then why that matters. We'll get another 2 marks for not moving the production plant overseas and why that matters. So I reckon we've got 6 out of 12 would pass. Not a very good answer, but it would pass. But I hope you can see what the examiner's getting at. In many companies, you're going to move production overseas? Well, go on then. In many companies, you're going to pay the suppliers late? Oh, get on with it then. In this particular company, it is a big deal. So some companies wouldn't care. Also, in this company, the decisions are being made by people who are not the owners. So he's deliberately put a question where this is a big deal. Yeah, if it was the owners making all the decisions, they'd do what they know is best. But it's not. It's somebody else making the decisions. So the idea is he's created a case study where this becomes important. Now, as I said to you earlier, a lot of people in the exam simply gave me some definitions. They didn't mention the Hammond family at all. But it's not difficult to mention the Hammond family. And if they just did some definitions, they got like 2 out of 12. It's not difficult to get 6 out of 12. I think it's difficult to get a lot more than 6, but it's not difficult to get 6 out of 12 because you simply think, well, why has he asked this question in this scenario? And it's something that we will see again and again and again in the exam questions. He's done it because in this case, in this company, the mission statement is the solution to the problem. It's a common exam question from your examiner. Here is something, talk about this particular thing, and whatever you're talking about, in this case mission statements, this is the solution. So the problems must be in the scenario somewhere. The problems must be in the case study somewhere so that we can find the problems. We can say why a mission statement is going to help solve them. So this is a really important exam question because it illustrates that. Here is the solution. What's it the solution to? It's the solution to problems that you'll find in the case study. So, what have you found? Why is it a problem? And then why is this a solution? So, again, applying knowledge to the scenario, applying knowledge to the case study. Okay, let's go back to the notes. There we go, I pressed the wrong button. Okay. So again, sorry, I should have just said this. So again, you don't need to know about mission statements in lots of detail. A brief definition. You don't need to know lots and lots of detail about what's good, what's bad. You need to say why it would work. Integrated reporting. Integrated reporting was introduced into the syllabus for the December 2014 exams. And I will be honest with you, the reason why integrated reporting has been introduced into the syllabus is because the ACCA are very keen on it. So obviously what they're thinking about is they're thinking that you guys, in 5-10 years, you'll be a finance director. You're more likely to do integrated reporting if you remember it from studying. So it's in P3, I think it's in P2, I know it's in P5. It's lots of papers where it's coming into. Now, to be honest with you, we're not going to have to worry about anything complicated to do with integrated reporting. The key thing is it links up with stakeholders. Because traditionally, what you've had is you've had your annual report, profit and loss account, balance sheet and cash flow, which is aimed at shareholders. But we said a little while ago when we were doing Mendeley, we said there are other groups of stakeholders who are also affected by an organisation. Well, how do they know what's going on? Particularly if they're high power, shouldn't you tell them as well what exactly you're doing or what your performance has been like for the organisation for the year? And so that's the idea behind integrated reporting. So instead of just saying shareholders are powerful, let's tell them what's going on, it's that, well, the employees are powerful, well, let's tell them. Customers have got a share, have got a stake in the business, well, let's tell them what's going on. So we're not saying give your detailed information, confidential information to everybody, but we are saying, or integrated reporting is saying, let's provide more information to other stakeholders to help them. So the kinds of things that we've got here. The financials is exactly the same as it's always been. That's your profit and loss and all the other stuff that you've got. Manufactured capital is basically things like buildings. So to be honest, both of those two are probably in your P&L and particularly your balance sheet already. They're already there. So there's nothing particularly new there. But now we come on to other things. Things like intellectual capital. Now this could be things like patents. It could also be things like ideas. It could be things like how much money is spent on training. Patents might appear in the balance sheet. They might come there as an intangible asset. But things like training and how much you encourage ideas from people, that probably isn't in the financial statements at all. And yet maybe that's something that is perhaps a key competitive advantage for an organisation. So perhaps we should think about that. Similarly, human capital, looking at things like what's our recruitment policy? What's our policy towards, again, training people? What's our policy towards encouraging people to take up more senior positions in the organisation? Maybe we should be reporting on that, because that might affect various stakeholders. The whole idea behind integrated reporting in P3, the way I think he's going to do it in P3 is, I don't think he's going to ask you what's the definition of human capital and what's this. I think he's going to say, he's going to give you a situation where there is lots of stakeholders in an organisation. And then he's going to say, what could you tell them? So shareholders, that's last year's profit. Here's this year's profit. Now you know that things have improved. What would you say to your workforce? What would you say to them? What would you say to the local community? How have things got for them over the last year? Have things got better for them? Have things got worse for them? If they've got better, if they've got worse, why have they got better? Why have they got worse? Give them some, what are you giving back to the community? How many people are you employing? All these kind of things. I think the way that your examiner would do it would be simply to say a question where you have lots and lots of stakeholders in part A, and part B, what information would you give them to show the stakeholders what you've done for them over the last year? Because that's really what the ACCA are trying to encourage. Natural things, that's things like pollution. So although you've got those 6 headings, I wouldn't worry too much about them. The key thing is, suppliers. Your supplier comes to you and says, what have you done for us over the last year? Customers, what have you done for us over the last year? Workforce, what have you done for us? Local community, what have you done for us? That you could actually say, look, we've improved things by doing this, we've improved things by doing that. And the reason why it's important is it's moving away from simply the most important thing is profit. I would not be surprised if you had a question, which is set in a non-profit organisation. Because obviously in a non-profit organisation, the financial statements to a certain extent are a bit of a waste of time anyway. That's not really what the organisation is there to do, but maybe there to report on, if you've got a charity looking into researching something, this is what we've spent on research, and these are the number of people we've done, and we've done this with them, blah, 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 blah. So I think if you're going to get integrated reporting, it's going to be what would help the stakeholders that you have identified in this organisation to understand the organisation better. It may even talk about what problems there are. Now, I'm sure you can see one big problem. Financial information is governed by financial reporting standards, which you study in F7, P2, etc. What about everything else? How is it? There were no standards for any of these things yet. So one company could do something, one company could do something completely different. Yeah, but the ACCA are trying to push this as something for organisations to start doing, and one way to do that is to start testing it so that students are aware of it, so they're aware of it when they're running companies later on. So again, I think if it's going to be an exam, it's going to be a very practical area. Right, I'm going to come back to the cultural web in a second. Before I do, I just need to mention what culture is. So culture, organisational culture, is the beliefs, the attitudes, the practices, the customs to which people are exposed during their interaction with the organisation. Now, that's the correct definition, but nobody ever uses that. The definition that everybody uses, including me, culture is the way we do things around here. That's what culture is. The way we do things around here. The way that you act. The way that you treat customers. The way you treat suppliers. Are you encouraging of new ideas? Or do you like to stick to what you've always been done in the past? Do you give junior people lots of responsibility, or do they have to ask senior people? Culture is very, very important. I don't know if you remember at the start of this particular session, I mentioned a past exam question. I compute, and it said analyse the culture and then assess the implications for the future. The way that they were doing things was going to cause them big, big, big problems in the future. Now, I know you haven't looked at the question, but I have. I can tell you that's what the problem was. The way they were doing things, it was going to cause them big, big problems. So in the exam, this is often a weakness. This is often something that they are doing wrong, and they need to fix it, because if they don't fix it, they're going to struggle. Now, the big problem with culture is because this is the way we do things, often people don't question it. So often people don't say, but that's wrong. They just accept it. That's just the way that things are done. Culture is really, really, really difficult to change. But if you don't change it, maybe your company will go out of business, which is what's going to happen with the iCompute company. Now, we'll talk about what's called the cultural web in the next session. What I want to talk about in this session, what I want to finish off with in this session, is talking about the types of culture that you have. You've got two different models. You've got Charles Handy's model and Miles and Snow's model. Which one will you use in the exam? You'll use whichever one seems like it fits in with what you're being told. I would guess, and it is a guess, Charles Handy is probably easier for the examiner to set a question on. I can't guarantee that, but Charles Handy's relatively easy. I can see how you'd set a question that fits in with Charles Handy much easier than how it fits in with Miles and Snow. But just be guided by what he's telling you. Charles Handy works particularly well if you've got different departments, because in different departments they may have different cultures. Miles and Snow is really about a company all doing things the same way. So let's have a look. Now, we'll talk about why the culture is the way it is in the next session when we do the cultural web. But all we're doing here is we're saying, what kinds of culture can you have? A power culture, you can see here, is heavily centralised. In other words, there are very few people that actually make any decisions. Everybody else does what they're told. Now, is that good or is that bad? I can't tell you, because it depends on the company. It depends on the situation. Is it appropriate or not? That's a different question, because it will depend. Is it appropriate or not for the organisation? Now, the great thing about power cultures is because there are only a few decision makers, it's very easy for them to react if the outside world changes quickly. The outside world is... A good example, not a brilliant example, but a power culture in the classroom, in fact, even here, we have a power culture, because there's only one person who's making any decisions, and that's me. So let's say that the ACCA decide to change the way that they are testing P3. The only person who has to change anything is me. I have to change the examples I use, or I have to change the notes that I'm teaching from. But I can do that very quickly. I don't have to ask anybody. I just get on and do it. So power cultures are very good because you can change quickly. Power cultures are very bad because unless you're one of the people at the top, you never get to decide anything. Now, you might be quite happy with that. You might be the kind of worker who says, I don't know, you know, tell me what to do and I'll do it. But in the exam, you might have a situation where the workers don't like that, where the workers do want to be involved. Power cultures don't let them. So is a power culture good or bad? I can't tell you. It depends on the circumstances. In what I do as a lecturer, you have to have a power culture. I can't have students saying, oh, I think you should teach this next. Oh, I think you should do that example. There has to be one boss, and that boss is going to be me in the classroom. But in a different situation, it wouldn't work. Role cultures. Role cultures is where people follow routines, people follow procedures, people do what they are told to do, not necessarily by having a worker saying, do this, do this, do this, but because they've got, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this task in this particular way, do this, do this, do this, do this. McDonald's would be a role culture. If you go to McDonald's and you ask for a Big Mac, whoever makes it will make it in exactly the same way. And it won't make any difference where you go, won't even make any difference which country you go to, it will be made the same way. Now, what's good about that is it's cheap. You do not have to pay high salaries to people with experience and making decisions, because most people just follow the procedures. So it's cheap, it is also consistent. As I say, you go to a Big Mac in London, you go to a Big Mac in you go to McDonald's in London, you go to a McDonald's in New York, go to McDonald's anywhere in the world, ask for a Big Mac, you get the same thing, or near enough the same thing. So it's consistent, and that might be very important for certain organisations. So, for example, if you've heard of them, BPP, who are a training company who teach ACCA and CIMA and other qualifications, that's what they are like. If I was teaching for BPP, I would be told, teach P3 in this particular way. So when you're doing Child's Handy, give this example, give that explanation, do this, it's formalised. And that would mean that in my classroom, I would be teaching exactly the same as all the other lecturers everywhere around the world who were teaching P3 for BPP. And the power of that, the point of that, is if you've got a client who is sending students to BPP in Manchester and London and Kuala Lumpur, they're all being taught in exactly the same way. The trouble with the role culture, of course, is what happens if it doesn't fit what you want? What happens if I don't want a Big Mac that's been made in that way? I want it done in a slightly different way. I'm not going to get it. So there are lots of role cultures that we come across. Lots of fast food restaurants are all role cultures. You have the burger like that, or you don't have it at all. Lots of government things that we deal with are basically role cultures. Applying for a passport. Whoever looks at your application does it in exactly the same way. Applying for a mortgage, applying for a credit card. All of them, they use a particular set of procedures, and it doesn't make any difference what worker is looking at your application for a credit card. They will do it in exactly the same way. So it's consistent, it's cheap, it's not flexible. If your conditions are slightly different, they don't care. Now, task culture, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite. It says the emphasis is on getting the job done. With a role culture, do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, you get the answer. With a task culture, what do you want me to do? Get there however you want. You could have task 75 in there if you want to. So with a role culture, do this, do this, do this, do this, job done. Task culture, just worry about getting the job done. Do it however you want. Now, one of the things that you will notice, if you haven't already noticed this, is that the F papers are very different to the P papers. F papers, they're all role cultures. F papers, it's all about learn how to do this. Learn how to calculate a minority interest. Learn how to calculate the income tax payable. Learn how to do an audit of inventory. Learn how to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. It's all role culture. You do it like this. And the lecturer basically says, do it like this. The P papers, P3 in particular, do whatever you like. I don't care what you do. What I care about is that you answer the examiner's question and you apply your knowledge to this scenario and you come up with an opinion. Now, what knowledge you apply, you could choose. How you apply it, you can choose. What your decision is, what your suggestion is, you choose. I don't mind what you do. The key thing is get it done. Now, task cultures are very flexible, which is great, except it means they're inconsistent. Each time we have a P3 question, they're going to be different to what we've seen in the past. And I don't think students like that. I think students like just to be told what to do. So students like role cultures. Do it like this. P3 is not like that. What do you think we should do? And in this question, what we did last time won't be appropriate. Let's do it like that. And it's hard. Once you see that idea, P3 bit is an awful lot easier. There aren't a lot of rules in P3. So which of those three cultures is best? It depends on the circumstances. I'm not going to bother about a person culture. It's very unlikely to come up in the exam, to be perfectly honest with you. Miles and Snow, to a certain extent, comes back to what we were doing when we talked about the strategic lenses. Defenders, basically strategy is experience. Let's do what we've done in the past. Prospectors, basically strategies, ideas. Let's try new things. Analysers, let's try something new. Let's try something that's new for us, but only once we know it's worked for somebody else. So we'll let somebody else do it first. If it works, we'll copy them. And reactors, again, won't be in the exam. So culture is all about the way that you do things. Some companies are naturally, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. Other companies are naturally, no, let's stick to what we've always done. It's very, very difficult to change the culture of an organisation. Very, very difficult. Because you're talking about changing people, and people don't really want to change. We'll come back and talk about that later on. So, again, what we will do is, this is the end of part 1 of session 2. So, we've talked about culture, what it is. We've talked about Charles Handy. The next session, come back when you're ready to it, 10 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, 2 weeks, whatever suits you. When we come back, we're going to look at the cultural web. So before you look at the next session, it might just be an idea to remind yourself of where we got to in this session.